Hey, Lana.
Hey Ruth.
It is really exciting to be doing this with you again. We've been slumbering a little bit as Home Birth South Africa, and yeah, we've just been talking and chatting and feeling quite strongly that we need to wake her up again. So here we are making a little recording to share with our followers and just yeah, getting back in touch again.
It's kind of like the first time round back in, was it 2010 when we started? That was our first baby, and now we're busy having our second, coming out of our maternity leave, whatever. Yeah, so lots of the landscape has changed, and yeah, it's good for people to sort of hear what we've been up to and what we have in the pipeline.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, as you mentioned, we started this whole project in 2010. We were two frustrated doulas and mothers, both who came from quite a strong home birth culture. We both grew up in a strong home birth culture, and we both had our children at home. So it was just such a normal and natural thing for us. And then when we were attending births as doulas and assistants at births, yeah, we were really frustrated that this just wasn't actually so much the norm, and yeah, and that there just wasn't relevant. There wasn't good information for especially South African families choosing or even just wanting to even consider this option. And yeah, so that's when we started having our was it quarterly gatherings that we used to have quarterly gatherings, and we started the database Home Birth South Africa, and yeah, we did that for 10 years on a regular basis in amidst everything else we were doing, which seems nuts now. I don't know how we did it.
Crazy. And I mean, if I recall, you only ever missed one.
And you also only ever missed one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we both missed one. Yeah.
Which really is quite a feat. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So here we are on the other side of lockdown, which is why we stopped. We stopped having our gatherings because everything shut down. And even when things opened up, we just didn't have the wherewithal to have a highly monitored, spaced out, masked gathering. So we never went back to having our regular gatherings. And it really, I mean, I think in a way it was a wonderful go-to for people, because, you know, initially it started off as a space where people would come, and initially it kind of felt like we were preaching to the converted. And then something shifted, and it just felt like there were really people coming from all walks of life, and coming for various reasons. And you know, it really varied why people were there. And it was just wonderful to create a safe space where people could come and ask their questions, share their fears, and also share their positive birthing stories. It was really wonderful when people did come back. They brought their baby. Especially when husbands came and shared their enthusiasm, you know, the anxious, the husbands who had started off being all anxious and asking the fear-based questions, then came back, you know, with this absolute enthusiasm. Was always wonderful.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you say, I mean, it started out just as a place for gathering information for the choice, or gathering information to investigate if this really was, you know, an option for a particular family. But certainly towards the end, just before lockdown, we were definitely seeing a shift in why people were choosing home birth, and a lot of it had to do with wanting, not relegating choices to an establishment or an institution. It really felt like there was a rise, like an uprising happening. And then lockdown was very much put an end to that. And quite rightly, as you say, you know, there were calls for us to recommence smaller gatherings, and it just didn't feel right to do an online. It just, again, there's something about the intimacy of home birth and the sacredness of it, that it just didn't sit right, certainly for me, to, post COVID and coming out of that. It still felt very much adrenalized, and almost all of us, I think, felt a little bit traumatized by being isolated and excluded. And yeah, a lot of the, what happened in and around birth globally, this sort of gatekeeping and division that it caused definitely affected births on this side. And this is sort of, I think, where we're feeling the need to open up the conversations again, and speak about how different the home birth landscape is looking, certainly in the city that we live, but definitely in South Africa. And because of the work that you're doing on your Troop Midwifery platform, it is a global issue. It's not unique to South Africa or to Cape Town.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we can all agree upon is that, the pandemic and the lockdown and this massive pause that we all had to take as a planet created enormous polarization on all levels. I mean, I'm not even going to go into the details, but because we all know what I'm talking about. But definitely it happened within birth as well. And there's always been a split, and there's always been politics within the birthing world. Always. We know that, those of us who have been involved in birth know this. And it was interesting with lockdown, because I found that initially there was like the pendulum swung much more towards home birth, because people suddenly realized that, oh my goodness, I'm due, I have to go into hospital with a mask on, I can't take my partner with me, and nobody knew what was going on. So it was scary. And I remember the first day of lockdown just getting so many phone calls, and I know you had the same thing, and everybody who was involved in home birth kind of just had to turn people away because it was just insane. It wasn't possible to support so many people suddenly wanting a change. So I think that played a big part in people making a shift in that direction. And then it kind of felt like it swung in the other direction. Like it became. So I remember initially in lockdown feeling like the births that I attended during that time were incredibly sacred. Like there was this real holiness to them, actually, because there was this, it kind of felt like they were tucked away in the silence of this of the city that was in lockdown. So it felt incredible, actually. And then as things started to open up, I think the fear really locked into people's bodies, and I think the medical system and the people working within it were already, I mean, I know that going into lockdown, they were already so overtaxed and overworked and burnt out. And then this happened, and there was a whole bunch of extra stuff now they had to deal with. And then it was level 3, and it was level 5, and then it was level 1, and it was all these different protocols that they had to work with. And I think home birth, and those of us who were working with home birth, became quite an easy scapegoat in many ways. It felt like it, or that also felt, I mean, that was my experience. And yeah, I mean, I haven't been attending births now for close to a year, and yeah, it has definitely felt like the climate has just become polarized into these extremes almost. And on the one hand, it feels like, on the one hand, I hear so many stories of, just the extreme over medicalization of childbirth. And again, like, oh, so-and-so has had this intervention, or this has been recommended to them. And it just all sounds like, it's just like reams and reams of stories of people having these, yeah. And then on the other hand, we're seeing such a rise in independent birth keeping, in families choosing to free birth because they just don't feel like they can find anybody that they feel safe with, even home birth midwife. And so that's what I mean by the polarization that's taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're now in a situation where home birth looks completely different to what it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And I guess it changes all the time. I mean, I've been sort of working, in the birth world for nearly 20 years. And if I think back, it has changed a lot. And home birth definitely is looking very different. What is now being sold is that, home birth needs to only look a certain way. There's this perception that you have to be a certain height or weight, or the now, as a result of lockdown and the ease with which people were being forced into categories has spilled over into birth. And so, yeah, this idea that, home birth has to be, in this suburb only, with this type of care provider and with this sort of backup, and then it's socially acceptable. And that is of concern, because, again, it's forcing people into a box that they might not feel aligned to, or whether that be, as a result of culture or experience or trauma, and I think for us, it's always been about giving people a platform where they can see themselves in terms of birth, the birth space. Where can I feel like me sharing my story doesn't make me feel ostracized? And so that's really what I'm hoping that, what we're about to embark on can give people back, because, as you say, free birth has been exponentially on the rise. Like every week I'm hearing of somebody free birthing, which is great. But a lot of those people could have worked alongside a midwife to support them, or a doula for support, and it kind of feels people are you're still making choices out of extreme situations. And yes, a lot of the times their births are beautiful, but we know that there are outcomes that have been devastating. And I think, just again, it comes back to the basic needs. People want to feel supported in their choices. And just be held in that. And I'm just concerned with this idea that if it doesn't look a certain way, act a certain way, then that's not okay or not acceptable. And so I don't know if you want to sort of segue into what it is that we're planning.
I feel like I just want to pick up a few stompies what you're talking about, just because, you've spoken about the change in the landscape just in the time, since you've been attending births and since I've been attending births, and since we've had children, and we both have adult children now, and so it's also since we were having our babies. And also since we were born. I mean, you were born at home and you grew up in a culture where that was normal, where that was, it wasn't something that you had to investigate or do research around or even had to pay for.
Exactly.
And I grew up with my mother being a traditional midwife, on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And there were I mean, there were some basic first aid medical supplies. We all had to learn some basic first aid growing up rurally. That's just what you do, because you live an hour from the nearest town. You can't just call an ambulance for every little bang of the knee, So we all learned to stitch. We all learned to pick glass out of people's heads. And, you had to know what to do when a baby was coming, So it was part of just practical life, in the same way as you knew how to grow a tomato, you knew how to catch a baby. So, and I think, like, on the one hand, it's really wonderful, the fact that, that I suppose. So I think what I need to actually just state very obviously here is, that you and I both grew up within Cape Town, or South African coloured culture, Western Cape coloured culture, where in the times when we were born and growing up, home birth was still normal, and it was still part of the culture that we were growing up in. That changed, with the opening of the MOUs and hospitals opening up. Birth started to move more into more medicalized settings. Within white culture at that time, home birth was definitely not a thing. And it started to become a thing possibly sometime in the 80s. There were a handful of hippies that then, got a porta-pool and found a midwife that would help them. And then it definitely grew in the 90s. And then, and it's definitely grown into something which now is more of, as you say, kind of like a socially acceptable thing within predominantly white middle-class culture, but not only white, let's say medical aid culture, private backup. And so that's a particular box that home birth fits into. And there's nothing wrong with that box.
Absolutely.
If that's the box that suits you. But when it becomes the predominating image of what home birth should look like, and I do not fit into that box, and you do not fit into that box, again, we find ourselves ostracized from something which actually should belong to everybody. And the reason you and I are opening up this conversation, and I'm just going to speak from me here, but I think you'll agree with me, is that we want to remind ourselves and everybody who's interested in birthing at home that the whole point of birthing at home is that it belongs to you, and that you make it what you want it to be. And yes, you may not be able to access exactly what it is that you want. And part of birth is that we don't have that we are actually meant to lose control. Like it's about non-attachment and losing, allowing what needs to unfold. But when we find ourselves not being able to financially afford access to birthing at home, or to being able to only access practitioners that only work within a particular paradigm, it completely shuts down the whole idea of what home birth, or the full spectrum of what home birth can look like.
Absolutely. And this is really where we're wanting to open up this dialogue with everybody. And I mean, between the two of us, we have this amazing pool of people that we know, clients, family, people that have been following our page, and us as birth workers that have put their hand up and want to share, like, I didn't fit that mold of what that definition of home birth, but is the way I birthed and what I chose valid? Like, am I wrong for choosing this? And I am so excited for the stories. I've already only reached out to a handful of people, but what incredible stories people are willing to share that include choosing free birth for so many different reasons, choosing home birth for so many different reasons. And as you say, because they're unable to access a particular definition of what a home birth might mean. But that's exactly the point. It is what home birth needs to be. The idea is that this is what home birth meant to me. And
Mm.
to, if we interview 10 different people, that would be 10 completely different things. And that's really an exciting thought, because it'll mean that of those 10 people, there are going to be another 10 people who resonate with one person in those 10. And there's, we all know that just sort of a story shared just really plants little seeds for someone else, thinking, oh, well, I don't have this kind of house, or I don't have access to this kind of medical care, but apparently home birth is still an option for me.
Yeah, it is exciting to think about all the, you've reached out to a handful of people, and I've reached out to a handful of people, and it is exciting to broaden the picture of what home birth in South Africa looks like, and to actually realize that we actually have a very, very strong home birth culture and heritage. And yes, especially in urban settings, I think we're seeing more and more medicalization of childbirth. But I think in rural settings, it's still, the traditional grandmother midwives are still very much a thing, who are unseen, and unspoken for, really. And, I'm going to say it as well, that, nowadays the word midwife has also been co-opted by the medical world. Midwife means with woman. And in many cultures around the world, you have the word midwife, and its definition is usually something rooted in the earth, or rooted in motherhood, or rooted in wisdom, rooted in light. And this word, and in English, it means with woman. And this word has now been co-opted and is actually owned in many, many countries by the medical establishment. So those of us who are birth attendants and have been in this tradition of attending births, and in some cases, it's been handed down from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter and so on. These women are no longer allowed to call themselves midwives. They have to call themselves traditional birth attendants, which is a title that was come up, I think it was in the 80s, that the World Health Organization came up with. And yet there is a strong culture of that here in South Africa and in Africa. I've been in service to a Zimbabwean community, mostly refugees, who have a very, very strong tradition of Anamboya, which is what they name their birth attendants, which means grandmother, actually. And I think there's a big section of refugee culture here in Cape Town and in South Africa continues to attend births at home and only accesses medical care when it's absolutely necessary. I know that when I've worked with women who are sex workers as well, they avoid medical health care. Why? Because they're stigmatized. The refugees avoid medical care. Why? Because they get bullied. The teenagers, they avoid medical care. Why? Because they get shamed. So we have all these situations where people are forced into choosing, maybe not actually, it may not necessarily be the safest option for them in that particular situation. Yeah. But if they come from a culture where they feel held and warm, and where the women are able to create that space of safety for them, then they do it. And actually, I believe we have a higher home birth rate in this country than we realize.
Yeah, there is no formal, there's the formal sort of standardized medical birth registration that each medical practitioner is meant to submit, but there isn't really anything capturing, the births being attended by traditional midwives, birth attendants, things like that, and families who just free birth. And also just heartening to use this platform for the midwives that have reached out to us and have said, yes, I'm a Sank midwife, but the way in which I have needed to practice or attend births at home completely erodes or is the antithesis of what I was taught in my medical training in a hospital setting. I cannot apply the same practices there to a home birth because the families are wanting and demanding and needing something completely different. And I have needed to change how I work, but yet I still don't, I don't feel supported by my colleagues, the backup or my community even. And yeah, I mean, as we know, many midwives who attend births feel incredibly unsupported. When you're being a home birth practitioner, it's a very lonely road. So yeah, this platform is for them as well. This campaign of sharing with us what home birth looks like for you. So yeah, we're going to be embarking on our various social media platforms, inviting people to share their stories. Well, obviously, we've never stopped collecting South African home birth stories that we will put up on the websites. So people are welcome to send us those. But yeah, specifically looking at the challenges of those that don't fit the box. What did it look like for you when you had to plan your home birth after cesarean? What was that conversation with your partner like to convince them that this was going to be your choice, with your family, with your friends? To the families who chose to home birth, they're still, babies that were going to be stillborn. What did that look like? We would love to have your stories to engage with you and really just offer you support and community in sharing those stories.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think that's it. It's a call to those of you who are open to sharing, and you can share in whatever way. I mean, you're very welcome to join Lana and I for a call like this, which we would record and we can put up. But if you'd prefer to be in written form or in voice note form, in whatever way is easiest for you to share, we're happy to receive. We'll put all the website and contact info in the information when we upload this. But I'm looking forward to it. It feels good to be just, doing something locally again. Thank you.
Thank you.